Hi YouTube, you've got Virtue for another clip. In this clip I'm going to talk about my experience of the real haunting of the Necropolis Railway in Waterloo, London. And I'm also just going to briefly give you a rundown on the history of this railway and this funeral train. In London in 1840s, 1850s, there was a real problem with too many dead bodies and nowhere to put them, because England traditionally buried their dead in churchyards. Unfortunately, that scheme didn't work in London because they were just chock full of bodies and there was no more room. So around that time, a lot of private cemetery companies came into play. There were, I guess, these two. There was the Necropolis Railway, who had a cemetery in Brookwood, which is in Surrey, and wanted to ferry the dead and all of the funerals outside London. And then there were the 7 cemeteries in London, private cemeteries, these were all private, that worked to also bury the dead of London, and they were making profits out of obviously what they were doing as well. It was a business. So the Necropolis Railway was run by one man. I've put some links below about the Magnificent Seven and also about the Necropolis Railway, if you want to get into it a bit further, who decided that Brookwood is the solution. Lots of room outside London, no restrictions of sort of city limits and planning and things like that. But the problem is, like most Londoners today, the majority of Londoners don't have their own private transport. We just use public transport. And back then it was similar. So they needed a way to get people out to Brookwood, because I think it's about an hour outside London. The Necropolis Railway and the funeral train was born. It used to ferry both the living, people going to funerals, people going out to visit their, loved ones' graves, and it also transported the dead. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a spectacular failure because of the competition of the Magnificent Seven cemeteries. They just never got the numbers they thought. They expected 50,000 funerals a year, and they got, in the first year, I think it was 3,200. But it still ran for a long time. The reason it's no longer standing, with the exception of the Westminster Bridge Station, is because it was bombed in one of the Blitzes in the Second World War, 1941. And they took most of it out, and that's what actually finished it. So that's basically the brief history of the Necropolis Railway. Links are below if you want to see anything else about what I've talked about. So let's go on to talking about what actually happened to me in 2016 to do with the haunting. For those of you that don't know my work, I'm a painter and a spiritual practitioner. I'm a left-hand path practitioner. I would also call myself a heritage witch. I have a very natural ability for spirit. I've worked with spirit since I was a kid. Communicating with the dead, knowing about the dead, is not the only thing I do. I do forms of magic, alchemy, witchcraft. But we're focusing on what I do with the dead. I paint most of the hauntings that I deal with because it just makes sense to me. And that way you get to have a look. Even though these things that I'm painting are in spirit form, you can also visualize kind of what I felt when it was happening. So I went down on a Saturday to Waterloo because I wanted to find this Necropolis Railway. I knew there was some of it still that you could see, and indeed I found it. It was the Westminster Bridge Station. So I stood across the other side of the road to get a good shot of it, and I held up my iPhone and I took a photo, and my phone instantly went dead. Instantly. Now I tried everything I knew which should have worked to bring that phone back, and it wouldn't. It just went dead. So I went into a little pub that was nearby and sort of sat down. I've got a charger I carry with me, and I plugged it into the charger. And it came back. And it wasn't completely drained. But it was the only way I could get that phone to resurrect. Now, my phone has never done that before. And it's never done it since. I still have the same phone. And it was just weird. Now, I've seen that sort of thing happen with hauntings before. That they have experienced, people have experienced batteries going flat and phones going flat. I had another event where a friend of mine's phone went flat because of something, an entity, or entities I should say. Anyway, I was quite nervous about what this was because I felt I had this really ominous feeling. Because as far as I'm concerned, something that's going to just flatten equipment like that, you really need to be a bit wary, because it does indicate that they're quite powerful. Now, as I said before, I have a lot of spiritual allies, and some of the things I work with is I work with the G'day Lower, which are specialists in the dead, and they are voodoo gods, basically. But they were warning me to be careful, because they said this is not a haunting that you're used to. That's what I was being sort of warned. Keep your distance and just be sensible. I went up and had a look at the actual building on the other side of the road, because I'll be damned if I'm going to be chased away by something, because I'm not. And I looked at the waiting room. There's the thing you can see, because often when you go past, you can't get in there because it's got bars. It's sort of got, one of those barred gates. But it's a beautiful old building. You see all the old gas lights are still there. It's just gorgeous. It's just a beautiful Victorian building. Anyway, I went back to the pub, and what I often do is, if I'm undoing hauntings or I'm exploring a haunting in public, it's difficult for me to actually talk it out, because I look like I'm completely nuts, because I'm sitting at a table with a nice glass of wine, and I'm talking to the glass of wine. It just looks like I'm crackers. So what I do is I generally channel it. So what I'm going to read you is I'm going to read you the transcript of one of the dead people who were trapped there, because basically what I had worked out and what I'd picked up on was that there was some sort of inhuman form there, which is what this is a picture of. This image is a picture of the inhuman form. But they were holding back a lot of dead souls that could not cross over, even though they knew they needed to cross over. I think there were probably I don't know, maybe 50 or 60. It's hard to tell when there's a lot of them, the actual numbers of them, but there were quite a few. And they wouldn't basically let them go. Now, I've never come across anything like this before, which is why the Necropolis Railway is a really weird situation. And this clip has been quite difficult. It's hard to explain something that I can't completely explain myself. So I spoke to this entity by doing a channel. Now, when I'm in a channel, I'll sit there with what I call my dead book. I mean, I'm just so cheerful to be around most of the time. And it's like a Ouija without the Ouija board, because I'll ask a question and then I'll let them channel the answer, because I'm good at channeling. I channel a lot of stuff, and I just let the pen go. And I'm going to read you the actual transcript. So let's move on to that. Okay, to talk about the actual transcript from the channeled experience, I need to set up how I work with hauntings and work with the G'day Lower. Generally speaking, if I get into a situation like this where something is dangerous for me, they will stop me getting near it, and they'll say, be careful, be warned, this is not healthy, we don't want you near it. But what I'll ask them to do basically, or what they will do, is they will bind it for me temporarily, and hold on to it and solve the problem in a quick fix manner, while I do perform witchcraft, a very old witchcraft spell, which is to bind these things. When you look at the image there, I've painted the binding along with these entities that were there. And these entities will now no longer hold back those that need to cross over, and they can cross over. So what I'm going to read is a transcript, because I asked one of the trapped dead to tell me what this thing was, because I wanted to find out what these were, because I've never come across them before, nor since. So the first thing I asked is, can you describe this for me? And he said, it's one entity, it's not human, it's got no soul or heart. They are very forceful. They have the ability to drain your soul, your memories. They hurt my mind with their constant chatter. They mimic. I'm just turning a page here. They have no idea of human life, which is really interesting, I feel. I asked him then, I said, why did they stop you from crossing over? And he said, they hold us here for their energy needs. And then went quiet. So I said, well, where do they come from? Do you know? And he said, the ground, they live in the ground with the filth. I think they are from the sewer below. I said, how many of you are left? Meaning, in my mind, it was how many had crossed over. He said, 1 or 2. I'm just having a bit of a run through this. Then he just started to talk, and he said, I've had so much in life, I don't know if I'll ever have the same in death. And I said, look, death, from what I know, is freedom. So I said, you should be fine. He said the entity was from hell. It was able to cling on to the human soul. It would not let go. It clings and clings. It mimics. It hears pain and mimics like an echo, and it won't stop. And then he just, he basically thanked me. And that was it. That then went silent. So it's actually a really interesting transcript, and it helped me understand what they are. What they're called, I have no idea. But basically, I've had no problems from them. I did find, it took me a few days afterwards to feel not filthed by them. I felt this, not a presence of them. I knew it wasn't a present, but I felt a residue of them. And I have to admit that I had, and a lot of really narky hauntings, I go through the haunting and I don't look like I'm being affected, but for 2 or 3 days afterwards I'll be, quiet and sort of very much wanting to be on my own. In the case of this haunting, I tended to cry a lot, but I think I was crying more for the people that were stuck, because I can be a very, very tough woman, believe me. I've had a very tough life, and I've had to deal with a lot of crap in both the spiritual levels and the life levels, but underneath it all, I am a big softie. I really am, and I just felt for them. And I felt when you get involved with a haunting like this, because I am very empathetic, and I could sort of feel their souls like lifting and going, and it was, so I was quite a bit of an emotional, I wasn't an emotional wreck. I would just sort of say, excuse me, and I'd go into the toilet and have a little cry for 5 minutes and then get myself together and I'd be fine. But, it does affect you, these things do affect you emotionally. And I think that's probably all I really want to say about this. If anyone has any ideas or any insights into this sort of haunting or what they could be, please let me know, because I'd like to know myself. So that was the Necropolis Railway. If you're in London, go and have a look at what remains. It's a short walk from Waterloo Station, and please subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you on another clip. Bye bye.